Shabbat Shalom. A few years ago, my parents moved out of my childhood home and tasked me with cleaning out my room. Among the boxes of Beanie Babies and Bar Mitzvah greeting cards that were once again in my life, I found a set of diaries that I had kept in elementary and middle school. Now, even if you haven't had the unique sensation of reading through something that you wrote in adolescence, you can imagine the intense cringing that might ensue from reading such diaries, especially when you read about your first crush, which I wrote about extensively. And I'll read you a snippet, and yes, I changed all their names for their sake and for mine. On May 11th, 2001, when I was in the 5th grade, I wrote in sparkly blue gel pen, Mr. Thomas always puts either Brian or Sam next to Emily. Brian passes lots of notes to Emily, and she always giggles. I wish she would giggle when I pass notes to her. Why is she being so nice to him? Maybe it's because he's good at soccer. Everyone thinks he's cool and everything is lucky for him. But I am weird and smelly and Jewish. All right, I appreciate the empathy, hopefully, or maybe you're feeling for me as a 10-year-old. It is really painful to read that and also kind of hilarious. A few things have changed since I wrote those words. For one thing, I no longer identify as smelly. And most saliently, my diaries from a few years later would show how I became much more interested in Brian than I ever really was in Emily. But in any case, I do remember being very, very jealous of Brian as a kid, wondering why I couldn't be like him. I remember trying to hang out with him all the time and playing soccer to be more like him, but clearly that was not going to get me very far. Who was it for you that you wanted to be as a kid? Not in the sense of wanting to be an astronaut or a doctor, but was there someone that you were jealous of? Someone else you wanted to be like? Someone with whom you wanted to trade places entirely? It's not necessarily just in adolescence, although I hope it happens less and less as we get older. Throughout our lives, we encounter people who seem so cool or so brilliant or so attractive that we sometimes just want to be them. In our Torah readings over the past few weeks, it seems that Jacob finds himself in this position in relation to his brother Esau. He manages to acquire his brother's birthright and his brother's blessing from their father. And in that moment, Jacob literally pretended to be Esau while talking to Isaac. Even in the story of his birth, holding on to his brother's heel as they left their mother's womb, Jacob can't let go of wanting to be Esau, or at the very least, being close to him or being like him. Jewish tradition often emphasizes Jacob's bookishness in comparison to Esau's brute masculinity. The Torah goes out of its way to portray Jacob as a mama's boy who liked to stay inside, while Esau was beloved by his dad for his ability to hunt animals for meat. And though the cliche is that we Jews might prefer bookishness, we don't have to try that hard to imagine Jacob as a quiet, nerdy younger brother, yearning to be the man that Esau appears to be so effortlessly. And the text makes clear that Jacob feels he needs to literally pretend to be his brother if he is to get his father's blessing. The rabbi's depiction of the brothers makes this reading almost unavoidable, at least for me. Rabbeinu Bahia, a 14th century Spanish commentator, sums up what many medieval commentaries say, that Esau was defined by his carnal pursuits. Bahia explains Esau's taste for lentils as a symbol of how he was not only fixated with meeting his physical needs, but also, since lentils are round, they represent that eternal nature of a man's craving for things to conquer and consume. You may not have realized it, but Esau's penchant for lentil soup was a sign that he was a real man's man, according to our medieval commentators. But by contrast, the commentators explain that Jacob studied in great yeshivas. They stop short, though, saying what may seem obvious, at least to me. that Jacob was also a man. And maybe some part of him wanted to be the kind of guy who take off his shirt and flex his muscles like his brother, to prove that he too was worth their father's love and maybe worth his own self-admiration. Jacob may have wanted to be Esau. He didn't feel satisfied by the ways in which the world responded to him, and he wanted something more. In an interpretation of Jacob's behavior, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, argues that Jacob demonstrates what the French theorist René Girard calls mimetic desire. That is, wanting what someone else wants because we want to be that someone else. Jacob wanted to escape himself, which led him to lust after his brother's life. In some ways, he succeeds at getting what he wants in this way. Jacob's manipulation and his ability to act like his brother allows him to receive his brother's birthright and blessing. And ultimately, our people is named for him. But Jews are the people of Israel, not the people of Jacob. Even if they are the same person, the conditions of Jacob's name change are worth considering. In this week's Parsha, we read the famous story that changes Jacob's name. Alone in the wilderness one night, Jacob encounters a man who wrestles with him until dawn. Jacob pins him down and, as is his wont, Jacob insists that the man bless him before letting him go. He asks Jacob his name and says, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have wrestled with divine beings and men, and you have prevailed." For the first time, Jacob can't pretend to be anyone but himself. In this moment of struggling to defeat his opponent, he gives of himself fully, and he becomes something new. Many of us read this story as if Jacob were wrestling with God or an angel, and we find comfort in knowing that Jews have been wrestling with the idea of the divine ever since then. But that's not the only reading of what's going on here. Genesis Rabbah suggests that this man was not God or an angel, but in fact the spirit of Esau. In this reading, Jacob's wrestling is a metaphor for his grappling with the parts of his identity that were not really his or him, but merely a projection of his brother. Jacob asks this man to tell him his name, but the man refuses to say it. And as I reread this Parsha this week, I was reminded of the 2017 film based on the novel Call Me by Your Name. Not only does the title fit neatly, but because of what the film depicts. It portrays two young gay Jewish men as they grapple with their first romantic encounter with another man. In the most famous and intimate scene from the film, they lie in bed and call each other by their own names, symbolizing perhaps that part of their desire for one another was found in something in the other that they wanted to be. Pairing this Parsha with Call Me by Your Name, we might begin to wonder if something else happened that night between Jacob and the mysterious man, which never crossed the rabbi's mind. But what strikes me most is that in each of these scenarios, it's through that striving that each character figures out not just what they desire in something external, but who they are inside. It is Jacob's destiny to become Israel. But he can only do that after he's able to really see himself and to be himself, separate from everything he wanted to be, but wasn't. The moment he wrestles and gets renamed is the moment he realizes that he can no longer pretend about who he is. We talk all the time about how being the people of Israel offers us an imperative to struggle with God. But it could just as easily be an imperative to struggle to accept who we are. And though hopefully most of us here tonight have outgrown our adolescent desires to be something or someone else, it doesn't hurt to remember that accepting oneself did not come easily even to our ancestors. Yet as they showed, wrestling to reach that point has always been a sacred mission. Shabbat Shalom.